Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Responsive Web Design 2. This is Lecture 5. Today, we are going to be covering Flexbox, one of my favorite parts of CSS, Flexbox. All right, and we will have an in-class, it says exercises, participation assignment, Flexblocks. Okay, so we'll be doing that. In the announcements, we have the sign-in sheet going around, and the recordings from last week are available on the website. That's it for announcements. Are there any questions before we get started into our lecture about Flexbox? Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Flexbox. So, just to clarify, everybody has had some experience with Flexbox and responsive web design 1. So mostly this is going to be a little bit of review, but hopefully it's a good review. All right, but before we get into that, I want to talk about a little bit about web design layout history, mostly because I've lived through it. I like talking about it. Okay, so the web has gone through a lot of layout techniques that we've used throughout the history of web design. To start with, early 1990, by the way, these dates are kind of what I came up with. There was no layout. So first off, the web, as we know it, HTML, was created in 1990. And it was created without any sort of layout or design in mind. It was just meant to be text with links, okay? And you could throw in an image if you wanted. So it really wasn't any layout for the first part of web design. We don't really call it web design. But once web design took off, we needed a way of creating structure inside of pages. And somebody had the brilliant idea that said, hey, you know what? If you put stuff inside of images inside of a table and you stretch it, it kind of creates a grid, because a table is kind of like a grid. Let's use that. So for a very long time, that's how we designed sites, using tables. And I did that. I designed sites using tables. It was a horrible experience. If you wanted to move something over here, you had to reconstruct your table. It's all in text, right? You gotta figure, like, is it this cell or that cell? And you mess it up, and your whole table would look wonky. Horrible, horrible experience. And by the way, you kept using it even into the 2000s. Then we came out with tableless layouts, and this was with the introduction of CSS. And so we could use the whole box model. Okay, and we could create things without having to put them in tables. It was great and wonderful, but we didn't quite have a grounds on structure. Things were still very fixed, which was okay because back then there was only like 3 different screen sizes. So it wasn't a whole lot of reason for flexibility. But then, 2007 came around and we started getting smartphones with tiny screens, and we were like, our sites don't look good on them, right? So then the whole responsive layouts came in, and this is the whole idea that we could use floats to kind of manipulate where items were on the page, right? So we could create these floats and kind of create a grid. So along with the responsive layouts and floats, we would get grid layout. Now the grid layout refers to your CSS frameworks that would create grids. So think Bootstrap, Foundation. They would create grids that we could use. They were really useful, along with responsive web design, right? But everything from here was a hack. We were taking something that was not meant for layouts, and we were trying to create layouts around them. And they resisted, and it made our lives horrible. But then glorious things came around with what I'm calling liquid layout, which is Flexbox and CSS Grid. These are aspects of CSS that were specifically designed for layout work, and that's why they work so well for layouts, and they're so convenient and so helpful. They're like, you want to do this? Oh, just type this one line of code, and it will do that for you. Magic. Okay, just beautiful, right? So that is beauty of what we're going to be learning. We're learning Flexbox. We'll learn about CSS Grid next week. It does make our lives a lot easier because we're actually using something that was meant for layouts for the first time. It's great. So be thankful you didn't have to live through this. Gives me shit. All right. Anyway, that's enough of that. Now we're going to talk about the display. Display property. So this is real quick, just one slide. We know that the display type sets how an image is or an element is being displayed on the page. Okay. Now there are two categories of values being added to the display. There are the outer and the inner. Okay. Outer display type and the inner display type. The outer display type affects the element itself. So it tells how the element should be displayed. And that's our block, inline, inline. Okay, we're describing how the element should be laid out. Then we have the inner display type, and this affects the element's children. This is what Flex and Grid do. So we're going to be talking about Flexbox, we're going to be talking about Grid next week. They affect the children, not the element itself. Okay, and that's a big difference. That also gives us a lot more control because we're now affecting multiple elements, not just a single. So keep that in mind. Okay, so Flexbox. Finally get into Flexbox. Flexbox is designed, it defines the box model, which is optimized for a one dimension. Okay, so when we talk about Flexbox, we're talking a one-dimensional layout structure. Okay, so with CSS Grid, it's 2 dimensions, and we're going to see that when we talk about that next week. But with Flexbox, everything's really about a single dimension. Yes, you can affect things in both dimensions, but generally things are laid out in a one dimension. By using the display Flex, we create a Flexbox container. Okay? Flexbox container has Flex items, and it manipulates how those items are seen on the page. Elements directly inside of Flexbox container are affected, as we talked about. Okay, so that's how we create the Flexbox container. Now, the next few slides, which is quite a few, all pertain to the Flexbox container and how it will manipulate the elements inside. Okay. Later on, we'll talk about what the children can do to disobey the parent. Okay. So, Flexbox container. It works with 2 axes. There are 2 axes when we talk about Flexbox. There's the main axis and the cross axis. Right? The main axis is the direction in which the children will flow. Okay? They will flow along one of the axes, or they'll flow along the main axis. Which axis that is based off of the flex direction. Okay? So just note, in a 2-dimensional space, we have 2 axes. We have the x-axis, which runs horizontal, and we have the y-axis. Either one is the main axis. Flex directions tells us which one it is. Right? Cross axis is always perpendicular to the main axis, so we set our main axis, and then cross axis is the other one. Okay, so the flex direction property allows us to set the main axis. The children flow, this is kind of repeating. So our options for the flex direction is row, column, and column reverse. Now, the best way I can describe how to remember this is, what do you want the Flexbox container to be? Do you want it to be a row, or do you want it to be a column? The last property that you're most likely to work with that we would apply to the Flexbox container is FlexWrap. And FlexWrap allows us to basically, missing this line. So children on a Flexbox container will remain on a single line by default. Okay, so if you keep adding more children, it's going to shoot outside the parent and just keep going for infinity. All right, because it just stays on one line. So remember, it's one dimensional, it's just going to stay on one line. Well, we have FlexWrap, which allows us to control how children will wrap. Okay, so we have no wrap, which is the default. That's why they just stay on one line. And then we have wrap, which will cause it to wrap. And then we have wrap reverse, which kind of reverses the order of which the children will wrap. They kind of wrap it. It's like row reverse, and they're wrapping it. A little weird. So here's an example. This is with no wrap. So you can see that the children just shoot outside the parent and just keep going. Okay, you can keep adding children and they're just going to go off the end of the page. It's not a good experience. So if you turn on wrapping though, it would look, oh, I forgot to update my slide here. That should say wrap. This is what, and I don't have really wrap reverse on here. We just have wrap. So we have wrap, or no wrap, and wrap is most likely what you're going to do. Okay, any questions so far on Flexbox? Hopefully most of this is just review. You should be somewhat familiar with this. Okay, let's talk about what we can do to the Flexbox items, what properties we can add. All right, so the first one we're going to talk about is order. All right, so by default, the children or the items of a Flexbox container will be displayed in source order. That's the order they're inside the HTML. When we talk about source order, we're talking about how they appear inside the HTML. Okay, so if we have box 1, 2, 3, 4, they're going to appear in that order. The order property allows us to alter that order. Okay, so we can change the order in which they appear. The order property takes a positive or negative integer. Okay, so we can add a positive or negative integer, and this is probably, default is 0. And this is a very important one because I think some people screw this, kind of mix this up the first time. Is the elements were placed in the order by the value of, by their order value. Okay, so when we say 1, we're not saying move up 1. We're saying your order value is 1, and if everyone else is 0, they come first. Right? It's not about whether or not you move one up your order. It's not adding to your order value. It's what is your order value. So let me show you an example. So here is, we're only concerned with number 3 here. Okay, so number 3 has an order of 0. The default is 0, so everybody has 0 and everyone is equal. So they're going to follow source order. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If we were to give 3 the order of 1, it now has a greater value than everyone else. Because remember, everyone else is 0. So it's going to be last. Because it goes in numerical order. So everyone's 0, so they come first, and then 3. If it's -1, it'd be the first one. Right? So that's how that works. Now, again, if another one here had -1, say if 2 had -1, then we follow source order. So it'd be 2, 3, 1, 4, 5. Okay? And we'll go like that. So again, order is all about the value we give it, and then we sort them by their order value. So in theory, you could give 1, order 2, order 3, and order 4, order 5, and it would be in source order. I don't know why you do that, but you could, in theory. Okay, so that's order. FlexGrow is the next one we're going to talk about. So by default, children will just take up as much space as necessary on the main axis. So whatever their content, or if they have width set up, they're only going to take up that much space. What the FlexGrow property does is it allows the children to grow to fill the available space. Okay, so they're going to stretch across the main axis, not the cross axis, but along the main axis and fill up the available space. Okay? By default, FlexGrow is set to 0, which means don't grow. Okay, that's why they just sit with whatever size they need. Elements with a higher FlexGrow value will take up more of the available space. Okay? Now, with that said, if all of the children are set to 0 and you set one to FlexGrow 3, well, it's still going to only take up whatever is available. Can't take up more than what's available. But if you have one set to 3 and one set to 1, the one with 3 is going to get, in theory, 3 times as much, which we'll see here in the slide. Okay, so here's our example again. Again, we're watching for number 3 here. So FlexGrow is set to 0. Well, everybody's set to 0, so nobody's growing. Okay? But if we set FlexGrow to 1 on 3, you can see that it's stretching to fill all the space it can. Question? No. it's gonna shift them, but they're still all inside the Flexbox container. Okay, it doesn't push them outside the Flexbox container. It's only the available space inside the Flexbox container. Right? So 3 is growing and he's pushing everybody. He's pushing them over, but we're still inside the Flexbox container. Okay? Now, if we were to add FlexGrow to 4, FlexGrow 1, so they both share the same amount. They're both 1, but 1, 2, and 5 are still 0. They're going to grow to fill the available space, but they're going to take up the same amount. Okay? They're going to share the available space. Equal amount of numbers for FlexGrow. Okay? But if we were to set 3 to 2, it's going to take up twice the amount of space as 4. And now, this is original space. If you have such as something like padding associated with this, it kind of throws off the ratio. Okay, so, but you can see that 3 is taking twice as much as 4. So that's kind of how FlexGrow. Any questions about FlexGrow? Okay. Align self. So the align self property allows you to override the align items property set by the Flexbox container. And this will be applied to an item. So a single item can choose where it's aligned on the cross axis. So the align self property has the exact same values as align items. So those were stretch, flex start, flex end, center, baseline. Okay. So here's our example. Oh, I don't even have the other one. I just did the one slide. So you can see here that our line items here is flex start, which means all the children should be at the top. But for our number 3, he's put align self to flex end, so he is at the bottom. Right? So he is controlling where he's going to be positioned on the cross axis. That's it. That's all I've got for Flexbox. Okay, this is a real brief overview. Right? Any questions before we talk about our Flexblocks assignment? I know, it's fun to look. Okay, so Flexblocks. This is a code pen. First off, it's participation exercise. It is a code pen assignment, so make sure you are logged in and that you fork your pen so that you can save it. If you do this whole thing without forking it, it won't actually save, and you could potentially lose all your work. So you want to do that. So you're going to use Flexbox to stack the blocks as shown. So there's little images next to each of the stacks, or inside the instructions, there's images, and you want to make the stack look just so. Each instruction, so there are 9 stacks that you're going to be doing. Each stack provides suggested properties for each stack. Okay, sorry, that's the wrong. Flip those around. For each stack, so it will list the properties that you should be using to make the stack. Okay, you don't want to change the HTML for this. You should be able to do everything with CSS. You'll submit the URL to your pen, and this is due tonight. Okay, so we have, wow, I went through that really fast. We still have over an hour left of class, so I'm going to give you 20 minutes to a half hour to work on this on your own. Then we'll come together and we'll work on it together. Okay, any final questions? All right, so go ahead and work on Flexbox, and then we'll come together and we'll go through it together. All right, so you've all had a chance to play around with Flexbox. Now we're going to come together and we'll work through the 9 stacks together. All right, so I didn't show this to you before. Whoops, if I unfreeze my screen. Okay, so go out to the course website. This is where it is. Hopefully everyone found this already. Should have mentioned that before. So we'll click on the link to bring up our Flexblocks. All right, so everything about this assignment is going to be done inside of the CSS, but you will probably need to refer to your HTML to be able to see what the blocks are. All right, so let's just walk through this. Gonna add some comments to let me know what stack I'm on. So I'm working on stack number 1. So stack number 1 is use the display property to stack the blocks to look like this. Right, so each of the stacks have a class that's associated with that stack, and it is stack dash the number of the stack. So you can just use that to make any of your changes. What do we need here for stack number 1? Display flex, right? For stack 1, display flex, right? Okay, super simple. Hopefully everyone got that one. Okay, super simple. All right, let's go to stack number 2. So stack number 2, what do we need to do here? So we use display flex again. And then we change what? The flex direction. Okay, that's what it says. We use flex direction. What does the flex direction should be? Row reverse, right? It's still a row. So our Flexbox container is still a row. It's just reversing the order of the children. Okay, so there is number 2. All right, so we're at number 3. We have to use display, justify content, and flex wrap to make it look like that. This up, stack number 3. All right, so we start with display flex. What else do we need? We do justify content space between. Between, if I can spell between right. What else do we need? What's that? Flex wrap, right? We do the flex wrap, right? That will cause the children to wrap down once they've reached the limit of the parent. Everyone see how that worked? All right, so stack 4. Stack 4 is probably one of the coolest things ever, because if you had any idea how difficult it was in the past to get a both vertical and horizontally centered an item, by the way, this is completely responsive. It stays centered. Was nearly impossible before Flex. Right? But how do we do it with Flexbox? Display flex, of course. So we have justify content. What does our justify content be set to? To center, right? Then we need to use align items. What do align items get set to? Center. Boom, that's all it takes. It is completely responsive, stays in the center no matter what size your screen is. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. So cool. All right, let's go to stack 5. Stack 5. What does stack 5 look like? Okay, so here is stack 5. It's a little hard to tell. It looks exactly like stack 3, but you can see that's with stack 3. There's some spaces in between and no spaces there. Okay, so it makes it a little different. So we're going to start with display flex, of course. Here's my stack 5. All right, so how do we get stack 5 to look like it's supposed to? What do we need to start with? So we use justified content. It tells us what does justified content get set to? It actually really doesn't matter. Okay, in this case, you could use one of those space something. Okay, so space something, just choose one. It's actually really not going to matter because we're going to fill up all the available space. So I'm going to set it to space between, but it actually really doesn't matter which one you use. Okay, what else do we need? We need our flex wrap, right? To wrap, right? Okay. Now what makes this look different than 3? We need to do what? We need to grow. Now, do we add flex grow to stack 5? Right, we need to add it to the elements. So remember that the grow is to the Flexbox elements, or the items, not to the Flexbox container. So we don't put this in stack 5. We create a new selector. We do stack 5.block. Okay, so that's going to target all of the blocks inside of stack 5. And then we do flex grow 1. Okay, that fills them. Question. I noticed that seems to be on your screen. It could be you're having issues with a font not being loaded properly, or you're using a different font. Could be. Yeah, it seems to be. I noticed it with just yours. That's why it's. I don't. Something's. It's not going to be a concern. Don't worry about it. Yeah, something with the way your browser's loading it. All right, that was stack 5. Let's go on to stack 6. I'll go ahead and add the display flex because we're going to need that for each one. Okay, so for 6, we have the children in kind of a running along the vertical axis, the y-axis. What should that immediately tell you? They're right. So they're all in a column. Okay? That should tell you that our Flexbox container is acting like a column, so we need to set our flex direction. Okay, we need to change the flex direction to be column. So that's the first thing we'll do. After flex, we'll do column. Okay? Now, that will make it look exactly like it did before we applied flex. But we still need to apply our flex because it gives us superpowers that we wouldn't have otherwise. All right, so we've used display, we used flex direction. Now we need to use the width and the flex grow. What do the width and flex grow? What does flex grow be applied to? Does it get applied to the stack 6? To the children, right? Width will be applied to the children as well here in this case. So we're going to do stack 6 dot block. We're going to set their width to 100%. Okay, that makes them stretch all the way across. Their width is, all the blocks width is being preset to like 50 pixels. So we're overriding that here. And then we want to set up the flex grow. Now, flex grow makes it use up the available space across the main axis. Our main axis is changed. It's no longer horizontal. It's vertical. So we're going to make them fill up the available space vertically. Because remember, we switched our flex direction. So we'll do flex grow 1. Or 2. It really doesn't matter. As long as it's not 0. All right. There we go. And we've got our stack 6. Any question about stack 6? Now we're getting to a little bit more difficult stuff. So I want to make sure everyone understands. All right, stack 7. Stack 7's probably a tricky question because we didn't actually cover it in class. How to do this one. So stack 7, display. All right, so here's stack 7, and it says display, flex, and margin, and that's all it tells you, or display and margin. Okay, that's the property you're supposed to use. So we do display flex. That gives us this little layout. Now, what we want is 3 to be at the end. Now, what would have been fantastic is if we had something like justify self and tell 3 to go, hey, align yourself to the end. Unfortunately, we do not have that with Flexbox. You get that with CSS Grid, but we do not have it with Flexbox. Fortunately, somebody's figured out a very brilliant way of solving this problem, and that's part of the reason why this one's thrown in here, because it's such a neat trick, and it's great for navigation, by the way. Because you can imagine, if you had your links on one side and maybe your search box on the other, this is how you do it. Okay? So, we do the stack 7 display flex, and then we just target our third block. Okay? This is where we're going to use nth child. So if you haven't used nth child before, pay attention. So the way we use nth child here, I'm going to target my stack 7. Then I'm going to target the block. Now this will target all blocks, but I want to just target the third block. So I do nth colon nth child, and I tell it which block I want to target, which is 3. Okay? Now, to make 3 off to the end by itself, we use the margin left, because we want to affect the left side of the margin, and we do auto. Okay? And that shoots it off to the side. Okay? We did not cover this in our lecture, but that's why we're covering it now. Very, very powerful trick, by the way. Great for navigation. Any questions about how that works? Now, this only works with a one-off. Well, if you use any like percentage, you're going to have a margin, but it won't be responsive. Like this is completely responsive. It will always be on that side, no matter how big or wide you make it. So auto is what you. All right, now we're getting to some really fun. Let's start with stack. We're in stack 8. How many people got stack 8? Just out of curiosity. You got 1. Okay, that's all right. This is where we're getting into some complicated stuff. All right, so with stack 8, again, we're going to target stack 8 with the class stack-8, and we'll go ahead and turn on display flex. We're going to need that. Now, in addition to display, we need to use flex wrap, flex basis, which I do apologize was not in the slides. For some reason, I'll always forget about that one. And then it says hint to use the calc function, which if you haven't used before, can be a little complicated, but we'll go through it. All right, so the way this works, if we look at this, we can see that, I actually forgot a property here too. So we can see that we have 1 and 2 sitting on by themselves, and then we have 3, 4 by themselves. If we were just to turn on flex wrap, turn on wrapping, they're not going to do anything because they're not taking up enough space to fill it up. Now, you might be thinking, oh, we could put on a grow, right? Which we will need to do. I do apologize. That is not listed as one of the items, but you will need to add grow. Or no, actually you don't need to add grow. We're going to use flex basis for this. So I'll explain how flex basis works. So what flex basis does is it gives you a way of setting the width of your item. Okay? It works slightly different than width. We could actually use width in place of this. But it does have, because it's specific with flex, it does have some extra properties that with, or it acts slightly different than if we were just testing. So we're going to target flex basis on our blocks, on the blocks themselves. Okay, it's another way of controlling their width. All right, so let's go ahead and target the second block. And we're going to use that nth child again. You should get very familiar with nth child. It comes in handy a lot. Okay, so we're going to target that second block, and now we want to set its flex basis. And I'm just going to start throwing in some flex basis just to see what happens. I'm going to set it to 100%. Let's see what happens when I set it to 100%. Okay, we set it to 100%. We can see that it's taking up the full width. Okay, it's trying to take up all of the space. So that's what happens when you do 100%. If I try and do, say, something less than that, like 80%, it's still off of that. Let's try a bit smaller. Okay, so there. Now you can see that it's getting wrapping. Okay, so this is just for 2. If I were to remain it like that, and let's go ahead and set up our flex basis for 1. Stack 8. Block nth child 1. And then I'm going to add some flex basis here. And let's say I want both 1 and 2 to take up 100%. So what should 1 be to be 100%? 40, right? If 2 is 60, it should be 40. Okay, so I want to do 40. And that should equal 100%. We're going to see this happening. Okay. Now, this is happening because there is a slight margin around each of the blocks. This is where the calc function comes in. So what the calc function allows you to do is it allows you to calculate what the size should be when you're dealing with multiple different units. So in this case, we're dealing with percentages and pixels, because what we want is we want 40% minus the margin. We don't really know what that is, but CSS can calculate that for us. So we're going to do the calc function here. We're going to do 40%, and there's a 2 pixel border around it, so we have 2 sides, so it's actually 4 pixels that we need to subtract. So we're going to do 40% subtract 4 pixels. Okay, so that's for block 1, and we got to do the same thing for block 2. So we'll do calc 60 minus 4 pixels, and there we go. Now, my ratio of 40 and 60 is a little off from the image. So it actually probably is something like 20/80. I don't actually remember which one I did. It's something close. Okay, so we're going to get to 3 and 4. But any questions, go ahead. No. You have to calculate the margin. You are providing it with what to subtract it from or add it from. It's doing the calculation for us, but we're saying we know that there's a 2 pixel margin around this. So that means on this side there's 2 pixels, on this side it's 2 pixels. So that's 4 pixels total. So I want to subtract 4 pixels from 20%. And that gives me the true 100% when you calculate the margin. A little extra information on top of Flexbox. All right, any questions of this before we jump into 3 and 4 of this? All right, so for yes. Yes. All right, so for 3 and 4, we are going to, well, sort of, to answer your question. I think I know what you're trying to do. So for 3 and 4, they will get the same thing. So we're going to use the same rule for them. So but we still have to call both selectors. So we're going to do nth child 3 here, and then we'll do a comma and apply it to both 4 as well. So nth stack 8 block nth child 4. Okay, so that targets both the 3rd and 4th block. Then we're going to do flex basis again, and we're going to do calc 50% minus our 4 pixels. Okay, there we go. All right, any questions about how we did that? I know we're getting to some more complex stuff, some things we didn't necessarily cover in the slides. Again, flex basis allows us to force a size, a width on our elements. It's pretty handy for when you want to force a wrap like we're doing here. Oh, it's calc, C-A-L. All right, we have just one more to do. Everyone ready for stack 9? All right, did anybody get stack 9? Just the one. All right, that's okay. Stack 9. All right, so stack 9. So again, we always want to target stack 9. We want to add the display flex, of course. All right, so on top of display, we're going to use flex wrap, flex scroll, order, and flex basis. So a lot. We're using a lot here. Okay, so first thing we want to add on top of display, we want to add our flex wrap. Okay, so we want our elements to wrap. We'll go ahead and add that. Flex wrap, wrap. And you will see that 2 elements do wrap automatically. Okay, but that's not really what we want, or that's only part of what we want. Okay, so now we're going to target, that's all we need for the Flexbox container. The rest is going to be all on the blocks themselves. So let's take this one block at a time. Block number 1. What do we need for block number 1? Right, so we can set the width to 100%, or you can set flex basis. Both will give you the same effect. So if you chose to use width, that's perfectly fine. Even though it says flex basis, you're still getting the same result. So we're going to do stack 9.block, and we'll do, so when you're doing with the first child, you can do first child instead of nth child. It's pretty much the same, so you can do first child. By the way, there's that. Just to show you something else. So there's first child and there's last child. Nth child is for everything else in between. But you can use nth child for the first one. All right, so we're going to do first child, and we're going to set the flex basis here. Spell it right to 100%. Okay, now make it stretch to the end. Okay, so that's, we targeted 1. Okay, so what's 2? What is 2 doing? Right, so 2 needs to grow. Okay, so let's make 2 grow. So we're going to do stack 9, block. And we got to use the nth child here, so nth child 2. Now we're going to set flex grow to 1. Okay, so you notice when we set that, 2 expanded to fill up whatever available space there is. Okay. Our third block. What do we need to do for our third block? We need to change its order, right? Let's do nth child. Oh my goodness. Nth child 3. All right, so we need to change its order. What do we need to change its order to? Okay, so anything bigger than 0, right? So if we just do 1, we can see that it's moved to the end. Okay? So why did it move to the end? It's 0. So remember that it goes in the value of order. So we've just set 3 to order 1. So it is being pushed to the end. How could we fix this? Go ahead. Which element to be specific? Right. So all we need to do is add, do something to 6, right? Add an order to 6. We're going to add it to just this line here. So I'm going to do comma. I'm going to do stack 9 dot block int child 6. Okay. All right. So that pushes it down. Now, what else does 3 need? It needs grow. What does 6 need? It needs to grow, right? Well, that's convenient, isn't it? So if we set them both to grow, look at that. And there we go. It's all done. Any questions about that? A lot of people are trying to get it all done. Yep, order is 1, flex grow is 1. All right, so that is Flexblocks. Okay, so this is a good exercise to play around with the different properties that are available with Flexbox. Okay. We're going to be taking this to the next level on Thursday, and we're going to actually be designing some simple layouts using Flexbox, and we'll see how this gets applied to web design and web layout. But any final questions with Flexblocks? Yes, absolutely. Okay, I will come over and take a look and see what's going on. Okay, so that's Flexblocks. If you have that all down, you've completed the assignment and you can go ahead and submit it. If you're having specific issues, I will come around and help you with those. We just have to finish wrapping up here and then. Okay, so that was Flexblocks. That's all we have for today. For next time on Thursday, we're going to have a Flexblocks demonstrations. So again, we're going to work through some layouts using Flexbox. We'll also talk about your next exercise landing page on Thursday. So speaking of Thursday, your assignment from last week, the site or page redesign is due. It's due at 11:59 p.m. You will have some time in class to work on it on Thursday. You can work on landing page or that, whichever you still need to work on. Any final questions before we wrap up? Okay, if you have individual questions, I will come around. We still have some time in class. I'll help you out. But is there any general class questions? All right, that's all I have. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you all on Thursday.